You ever play a game and then really enjoy it, and then when you look at the reviews or people's comments on it, you realize that they didn't enjoy it the same way that you did? Me neither. But no, seriously, imagine waking up on a vibrant alien planet with verdant greenery everywhere, one of the more beautiful locations to be seen in a video game, and interacting with the world on a different level than most games do, and then calling it Far Cry in space. And I went into this game expecting Far Cry in space because that's what everyone was saying it was. But wow, this is one reason why you should never take your opinion from Steam reviews or user reviews or reviews in general, because it's a really horrible and misaligned take. A lot of people played this game the wrong way, not because they're bad at it or it's a bad game, but because they went in with the wrong angle, this Far Cry in space angle. And it takes away the great impact that this game can have and the parts of it that shine so bright. There's tons of great little details and experiences that are unlike any other game I've personally played. Perhaps it's like some other games, but me, I don't know what that bit is. I don't think it's gonna stay. From world details to gathering and hunting, there's a lot in this game that's criminally overlooked, misunderstood, and underrated. This game isn't perfect, and there is jank and there is flaws. Those are just small pieces of a unique world experience that you probably haven't really experienced yourself. So let's talk about that. I want to take some time to talk about Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, exploring a bit of what makes this game stand out and why I've come to appreciate it as a misunderstood and underrated gem. Okay, hold on. I'm just gonna be honest though, I am struggling to read my script. I don't have my contacts in, so this is gonna be a video with glasses now. Don't know how that's gonna go, but here we are. So before we get too far into the video, I want to thank you for watching, ask you to subscribe and like and all that, but primarily I want you to comment. I want a dialogue, people who aren't afraid to share their opinions, whether they're hot takes, whether they're average takes, whether they're agreeing with me, whether they're disagreeing with me. And I know that people on the internet can be quite passionate about their opinions. Just don't be rude about it. That's all I'm asking. Comment if you would, subscribe if you would like. Anyways, let's get schmoovin'. Before we even talk about the game, I'm going to show you an unedited clip from it. So if you are someone who needs, jingling keys or Subway Surfers on the side, get that up on your other monitor. I want you to just watch it. And it's not because of viewer retention. It's because I think that this presents a part of the game or an experience of the game that really showcases it as different than some other experiences. So if this unedited clip even slightly gets your interest, slightly tantalizes you, slightly gives you a wow moment, I promise that you'll probably want to actually watch this whole video.
Sotlek, are you okay? That was way too close. Sotlek!
Well, some games do have intros where you go from chaos to peace or an inside world to an outside world. I think that the way that this game does it is better than any other game. I don't think any other game has hit the mark so well. For context, your character has been living in an RDA facility for their pretty much entire life. They've been inside their entire life. And so this exposure to the world of Pandora is completely new to them also. And it kind of creates this link between the player and the character where you are experiencing the same thing as the character. It's something that I talked about in Cyberpunk is done well, but it also happens a lot in this game, especially with experiences like this, with your experience with the world, because your character has to learn about Pandora, your character has to experience Pandora, and in this context, so do you. And this jarring contrast, this immediate contrast, is just so poignant. It's not just because it's a pretty game. This environment itself is such a jarring contrast. It's so immediately peaceful and natural compared to the chaos and the violence that was happening at the indoor environment you were just a part of. And it doesn't do some big text reveal. It doesn't do this big in your face moment. Like, obviously it is an in your face moment, but it's because it does it subtly. And you can go anywhere right after that. So suddenly the confines of the space, this very linear experience, even as a player that you're having, goes away in a moment. You lose all of that. This intro to the game is the first true sign that this isn't just a first-person shooter, this is a first-person experience. It's a very intentional choice that most players that play the game experience, and it should set the stage for how you interpret the rest of the game, both thematically and as an experience, but I don't think some gamers got that memo. You're stupid! And to be fair, if you're playing things casually, I don't blame you for it. I'm really mad that people call us Far Cry in space, okay? I'm pissed. It's not that. Even with guided objectives on, this first little experience actually can have you feeling lost, even with the knowledge to follow the stream that you have to follow. And it really soaks you into the vast expanse that is this unindustrialized alien wildlife that makes you feel incredibly small in the grand scheme of it all. And I think that's something the game in general does really well. Compared to humans and their environments, you as a Na'vi are noticeably taller, you're noticeably bigger, you're noticeably stronger. But when you go into this larger world, you are just a part of something so much bigger. You feel very small, but you still feel a part of this natural world. And the world never fails to remind you of how small you actually are, despite being so much taller than your enemies in the game. They integrate this feeling into the gameplay experience as well. In hunting, for example, they directly do it by telling the player that they're overhunting certain species of animals, that they're ruining that ecosystem. But even passively, they do it as the player hunts. Hunting itself is its own interesting journey, honestly. While you can hunt for resources or crafting from the hides and other body parts of animals, it can almost feel like a Herculean effort at first to get the good stuff. To get the good stuff, you have to hit weak points, you have to do quick kills, you have to do things cleanly, and with all that extra effort put into it, your materials that you get are better, and the gear that you can craft from those materials subsequently is better. Most animals' weak points are similar, but the animals themselves behave differently enough, whether they're aggressive, whether they will go on the offense, whether they'll just be defensive, whether they'll just run away, and their health pools themselves are also different. Like, you'll find sometimes where you're really struggling just to one-hit kill an animal despite hitting its weak point. And when you're starting out, the quicker and smaller animals feel impossible to hit the weak spots of consistently. And to the player's credit, it doesn't help that you can't like see the arrow in the body when you shoot them at first. You actually need a perk for that. It's one of my only gripes with the game. Or at least the bows in the game. But eventually you start getting a feel for where you can be, how you can act, how you can hit these shots, both out of combat and in combat. And it becomes more natural. If you don't do a clean kill of an animal or take a lot of shots to do it, it'll also suffer and cry out for a bit before it dies, trying to make you feel bad for sucking complete butt, like having the equivalent of Benji missing these shots in this Rainbow Six esports match. While players get better at hunting in games they play in general, it's especially notable here because it is tied directly to your player progression. While there is like a perk system, it's separate from your item gear level. And normally item gear levels are bad, in my opinion, in single player games. But in this game, it feels really natural because you and the character, both, one of the ways that you're interlinked is that you're getting better at hunting. You're getting better at resource gathering. You're getting better at understanding the world. And through that, you get to be better at crafting and you get to have better resources and you get to do better things. So it's the exact experience that your character needs to go through as well in this case. And for a lot of this game, the player's knowledge increases at like the same rate of the character's knowledge in a way that makes sense. There's also an additional little detail that when you're hunting, if you haven't been taught how to hunt by Solek yet, you just grab the materials from the dead animals. You don't say anything, you don't do anything. You just do the little hand animation. But after you're actually taught how to do it from Solek, you actually say, thank you for these gifts. You send them off to Awa. You do all these things. Like, that little detail didn't need to be there. They theoretically could have just have you saying that the whole time. But the fact that your character doesn't do it until after you're taught, I think is really cool. I think that's a fun little detail. This isn't necessarily an unnecessary detail though, because it makes sense because your character is relearning what it means to be a nut V, their culture, their behavior, and all of that. There's a couple other aspects that play a role, such as the maturity of the animal. A mature animal gives better resources, gives better gear crafting stuff, but a younger animal gives poor stuff. There is a perk that you can unlock and you can see what is mature and what is young, but you don't actually need the perk to identify that. It might take a little bit to learn, but the animals themselves have distinct visual patterns or like visual aspects to them that denotes whether they're mature, young, or like somewhere in between. It's very simple. I'm not going to say it's groundbreaking, but the reality is if you get used to that pattern, you don't even need your hunter vision. And it same goes for the weak spots. Same goes for anything else in this game. Another way the game grabs you and puts you inside the character is from gathering resources from flora as well. The gathering mechanic is mostly more engaging, a lot more involved in the way you grab it. You have to move your mouse or your thumbstick in a way that is you pulling the actual item from whatever its source is. The game first starts out by showing you the different ways to do it for different plants, but eventually that goes away and it doesn't announce that it's going away. It just goes away. But you as the player have done this so much at this point that it's almost natural for you to learn or know how to do this. Even when you're presented with new plants, you can kind of identify what needs to go where and do that. It's another example of you learning at the same time as your character more about the world and more about how to interact with it, how to harvest with it. And it's kind of a pretty cool thing. And I know it's a very simple mechanic, but it makes you feel a lot more involved in the world that they've created for you. And much like with animals, there are ways to get better loot here. So if you want to grab some certain bark or a certain bulb, it might give you better results if you grab it at night or if you grab it during the rain. Your character, by the way, has also learned the same. As they become a more proficient gatherer, so do you, and vice versa, all without actually speaking it aloud or shoving it in your face. It's a very passive coordination of immersing you in the character experience. I will say that it is a bit tedious sometimes. The only way to pass time or to get a certain weather event is to just go by a campfire and sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep. But you can pin resources that you want to find onto your HUD, which I think is over here somewhere. I'm still learning about this direction thing. When you pin the resources, you can also have like a direct, quicker access to see what makes them have their special like benefits and their bonuses. So if you're just out in the wild exploring or doing missions or just whatever you're doing, eventually it'll start to rain and then you can kind of make a note to like, okay, I'm going to go take a small detour. I'm going to go grab these resources, get what I need. So you don't need to skip through it. It's only if you're really trying to streamline the game. Sometimes I just wish that I didn't have to do RNG every time I slept. When it comes to hunting or gathering or going about the world in general, the player is equipped with the tools to approach it in any organic way that they want, which is pretty cool. But this goes past those things and even in subtle parts about the game, which I really appreciate. One such example is in the most Far Cry-esque aspect about the game, these oil or drilling sites that the RDA has set up. They are very reminiscent of Far Cry outposts, and I think they're legitimately the only reason why people could associate this game with Far Cry in space. Sure, I'll give you that one, I guess. If we're being technical, they sort of serve a similar purpose. These areas are polluting the local area, preventing animals and plants from growing, things that you need to harvest, but also just showing damage into the environment in general. When you clear them, the pollution goes away pretty much right away. You see it come back and you can hunt and gather those things right away. I think it's a little weird that it comes back immediately, but it makes sense from a gameplay perspective. And as you do go back to these outposts later, more nature has kind of reclaimed and even taken over these sites. So you can actually see slow progression. And I don't know what the timer is. I don't know if it's in-game days or in-game or like actual real life hours. Part of me just wishes that it wasn't so immediate. These outposts are generally different or fun enough to clear that when trying to clear them all and going back to back with them, it never really got boring for me in my playthrough. And even when it did, I I just did something else. But the really cool thing is that in each of these areas, even the larger ones, they can be completed without ever using that hunter vision. Pipes for oil machines lead to the things you need to sabotage. Power lines keeping something active are followable and actually trailable through the ground. You could, in theory, play this entire game without using your hunter vision, including these outposts, though I don't doubt that it would take longer. Well, something like this may seem basic. Most games just shove pipes or wires under the ground and highlight the objectives. This is, especially from a streamlined UX perspective, an entirely needless detail that honestly fucking rocks, dude. Similarly, there are these things called budding watchers, little areas that offer minor rewards for activating all these extensions of a large plant. Honestly, to me, the rewards are meh, but what's really cool is that if you try and use your hunter vision, you can't actually see the extensions of the plant that you need to go to. You actually need to follow little trails of mycelium and then you can see the plant. When the plant is in your line of sight, you can see it with the hunter vision and it's a bright blue, but the reality is it's not an efficient way to look out. Like you can run around the area with your hunter vision and hope to catch a glimpse of it, but usually the areas are designed in a way that there's a lot of obstructions of line of sight. So you're actually kind of forced to explore the world and experience the forest or do whatever, you know? It's really cool the way that it makes your supervision not so super. I think a lot of games, when they have a supervision, it's way too powerful or there's not enough drawbacks. And I feel like players can use it as a one-stop shop for most of the problems that they have. And this game isn't innocent from that. I want to make that clear. This can absolutely, and you will absolutely use this vision a lot. But in this case, I feel like it's a lot more poignant where it's like, holy shit, I can't use this vision. It's slightly annoying, but when you think of it as like actually engaging the player in the world, which is what the devs are doing here, what I've talked about, everything about this game is making you interact with the world. This is a very intentional choice for them to do. And I think it's really cool that this doesn't appear through the walls or through the floor and that you need to actually follow these trails. While these budding watchers are obviously placed for player interaction, there's a lot in the world that just feels natural. Well, I'd argue that some of the bark spawns are drier than a nun's hoo-ha. They really should be more frequent. The actual world itself genuinely feels alive. It's crazy to think that, although naturally it looked completely different, there are aspects of where human civilization is today that used to look something like this, completely taken over by wildlife. And it's just so cool that we can experience that, even though obviously it's an alien world. The base game has 3 different areas that feel vibrant and alive in their own way, from the howling winds of the steppe to the dynamic forests of the other 2 areas. Each zone has its own set of biomes, which have its own set of plant spawns and animal spawns, and while some of them overlap, they're generally unique and different, and you can identify them using the map system. There's like a little biome thing, but you also can start to visualize the differences. Some of them are notably different from the rest, but a lot are sort of like similar with their own differences that are generally subtle and less in your face. So it makes it feel more about like an actual forest, for example, where, you know, there might be a bunch of trees, like let's say oak, maple, whatever, but then in one area there's a decent amount of birch in like scattered along, but that birch isn't throughout all of the area. And it feels like that. It feels like it's an organically grown wildlife system. You can learn to parkour along the trees and the tree branches and really kind of get an awesome flow going. At first, it takes a little bit. You feel like you're stumbling. You feel like you can't jump far enough. You don't quite understand how everything works yet and how to like pinpoint where to go next. But eventually you get a hang of it and it feels so satisfying. Don't get me wrong. It's not like Assassin's Creed where you have like guided walking or anything, smooth animations. It'll feel a little clunky because you're just doing basic jumps in a first person game. On the topic of movement, I'm just going to say you can sprint backwards in this game. So Black Ops 6 Omni movement can eat Avatar's bioluminescent blue booty. When you're not in the wild, and let's say you're in a mission and you have to climb up to some area, especially the climbing here, Ikran is a great example. The areas are more linear, but they don't feel linear. You're more guided than explicitly directed. You can still choose any path you want, and you may even second guess if you're going the right direction, which is a weird feeling to have in a game nowadays, but it's really cool because you're not sure if you're going the right direction, but you can still end up finding your way when you're traveling, and it becomes rewarding when you get up to the position that you're trying to get to. Whether you did take an intended route or you did make your own, it feels rewarding that you even had that struggle in the first place. It's a great way for these missions to not feel time consuming or tedious when you're just climbing through things, but still more engaging and, questioning. Because again, your character doesn't know the way to go through all of these things. They're just doing it on their own. The sense of exploration is further rewarded with the way the map works. I know Ubisoft is known for Ubi Towers and whatever, and honestly, I think that Ubi Towers get too much hate. Like, not even just for Ubisoft, I think in general. It's hard to think of certain ways to unlock a map for a player that doesn't feel tedious, slow, or obnoxious. Like, I know we're at a point in gaming where these towers feel obnoxious. Give me 10 good ways that games can have you unlock a zone of a map visually without being contrived. You can't. Promise you cannot. That being said, I understand that I think more devs need to innovate on what the tower system is, whether it comes with its own mini games or like whatever. Like, it can't just be go to zone, do a little 360 camera, and then you're good. This game doesn't have any of those. However, it is a fog of war map, so it only shows you where you've been and like a little bit of a radius beyond your vision. I really like this approach for this game because it encourages player exploration that way. You don't actually know where outposts are on the map until you've cleared the area of the map or you see their smokestacks. It never really makes you miss the towers or the benefits of the streamlined experience that it provides gamers, which is pretty hard to do. I find that there's some games that don't have those towers that just give me the towers. But in this game, I never missed them. And I think it's partially helped because when you can fly with your Ikran, you can cover a lot more distance. You're not blocked by trees as you're running around or anything. You're literally above all of the trees and you can clear out the map. If you make a beeline through the story and you're not interested in exploring, you get rewarded with the ability to travel fast over the land pretty quickly. But if you do like exploring, you're still kind of rewarded in the whole sense of exploration, even if you do fly your Ikran everywhere. The way the map works is also a direct extension of how the game makes you and the character interlinked.
System of cells interlinked within cells interlinked.
You don't know that part of the world because you've never been there, and the character doesn't know that part of the world because the character's never been there. So it's another way that the two of you are actually interlinked in a way that, again, I'm sure is intentional by the devs here. Do you see what I'm getting at so far? The game makes you so much more in tune with your character than I think a Far Cry ever has. I'm not going to critique Far Cry 6, Far Cry 5, Far Cry 4, 3, 2, 1. I don't give a shit. I've mentioned the Ikran a few times, and it's honestly a great feature for moving around. While diving through the forest or running through it can be a lot of fun, sometimes it just gets tedious, and the fact that flying is so easy and you don't have a lot of threats to worry about in the air for the most part is nice. It's populated enough that you can always find something to do generally in the sky, but it's never over the top impeding your progress, so it feels nice that you kind of have an avenue. You're rewarded with being on foot and exploring, but you're rewarded with being on air and going from point A to point B. There's just beautiful sights and the dope feeling of having your own personal dragon murder bird, which you get to choose from a list of names the game gives you that actively get used as you play. So it feels like the name that you choose for your Ikran is like it matters. It's not just like a Breath of the Wild, that's the name of your horse and it never gets said or anything. For my playthrough, I chose the name Katir, and you say that name a lot. And it does kind of suck to not necessarily be able to input your own custom name, but honestly, the feeling of choosing a name and having my character use that name all the time, I honestly prefer that feeling. There's this weird gatekeeping of the Ikran that happens when you unlock the new zones. You're unable to fly for an obviously contrived reason. Their excuse is that your Ikran isn't familiar with the area, so you can't fly. And it's the game's way of getting you to be on foot and experience this new zone, this new world, this new biome. Like, it's a great intent to get you to experience that world, because again, that's what this game is all about doing, but it's such a contrived reason that it makes me hate it. So I came up with like 3 different ideas off the top of my head when I was writing this script that I'll give you right now that fits so much better than just Ikran unfamiliar. Why not have a massive storm that's around for a while with the winds that are too strong to fly in, so you have to be on ground? Or your Ikran gets kidnapped and you have to rescue it, bringing you into the new zone. Or the RDA has a heavy sky presence, so you need to do a few missions to clear out all the helicopters and stuff in the sky before your Ikran can be flown. You know what I mean? These are ways that can be directly integrated into the gameplay or the story rather than just saying, oops, can't fly right now. And the worst part is you unlock the flight relatively quickly. We're talking like 2 to 3 missions into these new zones, you can unlock the ability to fly. So why not make those missions do something with it? I don't know, man. It just felt a little bit lazy and a little bit too quick for me. Again, I'm down to be forced to be on foot at first. I like being forced to explore and experience each unique zone and each biome, but There's a better way to do it, man. Editor Callum here. I had a whole section where I was talking about the moment when you get your Ecron and how the effort you put in feels rewarded, but I've actually edited that out because originally I wasn't going to show the footage because I think it's something that should be experienced, but then I realized that I also probably shouldn't talk about it if I want it to be experienced. So just to save those of you who are potentially going to play the game, I've cut it out. I'm sorry for that, but it's just how I feel it should be done. So I also said that I'm going to be doing like a hot sauce dab for every unnecessary like that makes it into the video. So like me saying like that. And I will be doing that. That full video will be released to members, and I think I'll do a snippet at the end of this video. I'm not too sure yet, but I just wanted to get that out there. I really appreciate that it felt like there was effort in getting your Ecron, while also not making it too annoying for the player that they're like, man, just give me the Ecron already. As far as effort is concerned, this game can be played with as little or as much effort as you want. When it comes to Far Cry, I feel like at a certain point, everything just becomes trivial and it's just going from point A to point B and clearing shit out. But this game, in my opinion, never really felt that way. Part of it's because of the way the item gear system works. If you are struggling to raise your item level and then you pick up some new loot that, you know, you have to actually replace your one bow with a different bow, or you replace your assault rifle with a shotgun, the game actually kind of makes you have to adapt to each unique loadout, or at least force you to do some good hunting and gathering to keep that loadout, but get better materials and better results from your crafting. But there's also this idea that you can do guided objectives or unguided objectives. The unguided objective, it just tells you like the rough idea about where to go. So in the example of the beginning of the game, it says head downstream, and you don't actually have a direction to go. You just like, okay, is this the right stream? Is this where I'm going? And the unguided does that for pretty much every objective. You have to discover where you're going. Again, this game is about exploration. It's about experiencing the world, and this is one way that you can do that and actually force yourself to do that. You can have your guided mode on, which normally has like a blue waypoint that guides you to where you need to go specifically, or at least a rough area of where you need to go. So you can have this streamlined guided experience if you wanted. I did that for my playthrough because this technically wasn't a backlog game, but it also sort of was. It was a game that I was trying to sort of rush through, but then when I was playing it, I realized that rushing through it is a crime and is punishable by death. So here we are on a video. So lastly, I want to speak about the final mission, and I'm not really going to spoil anything, although I don't really think there's much to spoil. If I'm going to be honest with you, and I'll open up about it a little bit after this, the writing isn't super fantastic. So you can kind of guess where the final mission, like how the final mission is going to go down. However, the final mission does something really good. Really good. You can't just teleport to the nearest fast travel location to go to where the final mission takes place, the actual final battle. You actually go from point A to point B on your Ecron, and you ride through, and you go with other Ecron and other Navi, and you have this experience, this build up to going to this base for this ultimate showdown. I want to highlight that because not a lot of games do that. They go out of their way to make the final mission a spectacle, which is awesome, with unique boss fights, sometimes unique mechanics, and I like that. I'm okay with that trope, and this game does do that as well. But usually it's just you start the mission, you go through the talking moments, and then you do the mission. But there's a space between number 2 and 3 here, okay? There's a space between those. There's actually a third thing. Whoa, how did that happen? Whether you care for the story or not, I wasn't too invested at that point. It was still really notable that it made you unable to fast travel and that you had to go by your Ecran. It sort of helps you get one last feeling of you're liberating this planet, that you're doing the right thing. In fact, this is a great example of how everything I've talked about, especially when it comes to experiencing the world, is intentional game design. This game is trying to slow you down one last time and say, hey, this is the world. Hey, look at what you've done. Hey, look at what you're doing. And it's trying to smack you in the face and be like, this is intentional. Pay attention. You know what I mean? If they weren't going for that, you would have been able to fast travel to a near location. But they really want you to experience this final mission in the way they want you to experience it. And that's notable. But even though they obviously put effort into crafting the game and making it this way, I do want to talk about a few negatives with the game. While I don't want to speak negatively on games a lot on this channel, I think that if you want to hear negativity on games, it does so well for clicks and stuff, even though it absolutely poisons the gaming community. You can find anyone shit talking anything if you really try hard enough. I want to make that clear. There are people who shit talk Red Dead Redemption 2. There are people who shit talk Rayman, Raving Rabbids. I don't give a crap if it is valid or if it's not. I just don't think that there should be that much negativity around. And so for that reason, generally, I'm going to avoid talking about negatives in games. It doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means it's not something that I want to talk about, especially with the way I want to frame a lot of the content that I do on this channel. If you want to hear baseless or hollow bitching about video games or Ubisoft or whatever, this isn't going to be the channel for you. I'm not going to glaze them. I'm not going to praise them. I'm going to be genuinely objective, specifically in the perspectives and the points that I'm making. It doesn't need to be said. What I talked about in the Cyberpunk video, I don't need to talk about the pedestrians in that case. I'm not talking about the overt immersive details. I'm trying to talk about the more subtle or nuanced things. However, because I do genuinely recommend this game, especially if you play it with the understanding that I had for it, like I basically have an ethical imperative to bring up some of the issues that I have with the game. It's not going to be all of the issues that I have with the game, but it's enough that I think it's worth talking about, because if I'm going to recommend a game to someone, I want to let them know the bad. I think that's just fair. I think that's just how I should do it. So in this case, I will talk about some of these bad points. And I'll start with what I already hinted at before, and it's the writing. The writing is bad. Look, I don't care how you feel about Avatar being Dances with Wolves in space. I think it's a fun concept. I think that's literally all it needs to be. But the writing in this game is so bad. The characters, not fantastic, but mostly it stands out with the enemies or with the antagonists. I vibe with the message of the game, but it's very direct and leaves little nuance, which I know is something that game developers are struggling with and media in general is struggling with for several reasons. One, because everyone is on their phones at all times and therefore always distracted. If you've noticed for any of the things that you watch in streaming, a lot of these shows say a lot and don't show a lot, and that's because they're expecting you to be on your phone. The problem is when you're not on your phone, it's really annoying and it stands out as a glaring issue. In this game specifically, they don't necessarily have that issue, but that's one of the reasons why it happens. And two, and this is the reason for the bad writing in this game, audiences are stupid. I mean this in the kindest way possible, but the average adult reading level in America is grade 7 or grade 8. I know this because my job is in marketing and I have to dumb down almost every single message I put out because it is too smart, even though it uses no big words. I'm not trying to offend you. Some of you watching this video only read or understand or interpret communications and messages at a 7th or 8th grade level. You need direct communication. This nuanced stuff doesn't work on you. And so because of that, the script in this game is very direct, and it really shouldn't have to be. This would be so much better if it was written uncaring about that, but it's not. And it sucks because it leads to this comically evil villain diaspora that is present throughout the RDA. A great example of what I'm talking about is people think Helldivers isn't satire when it obviously is. And it's because it doesn't directly say, hey, Super Earth is a bad fascist government. And you still have people saying, it's not satire, it's based. But the game goes out of its way to make the RDA the bad guys when we know they are the bad guys. You can understand they're the bad guys. They are destroying this planet. They are obviously being greedy, capitalist, whatever, killing these Na'vi because they want the unobtainium or the resources that are available on the moon. I think that's enough. Even like the enemies walking around will be like, no Geneva Convention here. Blues aren't even human. Okay, that's just fucking weird. Like, why would you write that? Why would you have someone perform that? We know they're bad guys. And I'm not against them saying like, oh, I can't wait to kill more Na'vi today. Or, oh, kill a blue yesterday. It felt so good. I'm okay with a few lines like that. But every line is like that. Every line. It's so much. It's so bad. Like, I'm okay with forcing tropes onto evil characters and stuff, but they are cartoonishly evil. They're unbelievably evil. And the antagonists are the same way. It's like every other line is like reminding you of how horrible of a human being they are. You don't need to do that. I couldn't take the villains seriously at a certain point. I get it. And in real life, horrible people exist. And in real life, horrible people have existed and will exist in the future, especially around the topic of colonization and residential schools. But their existence and a few scenes showing it is all that's needed. I don't know if the point is to hammer home, like to make people more sympathetic towards the residential schools or colonization that took place in real life. And I think that as a goal isn't inherently a bad thing, because I do think a lot of people don't understand how severely bad a lot of that was. I know I don't, and I still take it more seriously than a lot of people do. This is just bad writing. I'd rather you show some of them as people, like talk about them just working for a paycheck or reducing crime sentencing for their years or something, or trying to make money for like a family surgery. I'm not going to regret killing them. They're my enemies in the video game and I have to work through it anyways. And it's not going to humanize them in a way where I'm like, oh, oh no, he just wants to get spinal surgery, I'll still kill them. With a game with this amount of immersive detail and forced experience of the world, it's mind-boggling that they went in such a cartoonish direction with the writing of the evil people or the villains or the antagonists. It's incredible. Speaking of the enemies though, while there is technically variety in them, there's not a whole lot of variety in them. Some of the amps do have different weak spots and stuff, and a cool little immersive detail is that in the beginning area, you can actually see that the Navi hit the weak spots on the back of the amps, which I think is a cool little detail. And I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. But that's it. There's standing humans and then there's amps, and the amps usually have one of like 3 varieties of weak spots. And I understand that amps themselves are very limited, and to lore credit, it would make sense that a massive industrial complex would streamline their equipment like this, like these kind of exosuits. It makes sense that they wouldn't want to make each one of them unique, but from a gameplay perspective, it feels like there's not a lot of variety in the human enemies, and that does suck a little bit. Additionally, when you are in the wild and you're just going along, you're running through the forest, any of the Navi that you run into all speak English. Well, they do switch to cultural languages in different cutscenes and in certain contexts. It's unclear whether it's like Avatar 2, which is actually a really clever way to make them sound like they're speaking English and make it understandable to the audience while also just explaining why they're not going to be talking in Navi a lot. I think that's cool. I think that's cool. I'll say it. That was a very fun and creative way to do that. Like, why do these random ass Navi that are just chilling out somewhere speak English? How do all of them know it? And why are they choosing to speak it? There is something to be said about colonialism in our own history and forcing languages onto other cultures and onto occupied people, but they aren't technically occupied. They're contested, if even technically that. Their cultures are still strong and whole for the most part. They are scattered. They are damaged. This is still like recent changes to their life. They haven't lost all this culture. They still have big homes where there's hundreds of these Navi, and these Navi are part of that. So why are they all speaking English? Lastly, there are some jank in the cutscenes. I appreciate the cyberpunk-esque approach of like forcing it all in first person and trying to make it integrated, but there's so many fade to blacks and random cuts and teleportations and cutscenes that suck. I got near like probably the later half of the middle part of the game, I started skipping them. Between the writing and the cutscenes just being so jarringly done, it felt like it was really rushed, which is possible. Like, they tried to time this release of the second movie, so I do get if it was rushed a little bit. Even if they did the Bethesda thing where they're always looking at you, no matter what, I probably would have preferred that. So even with all these issues and a little bit more, I honestly still fully recommend the game. I personally got it on a sale, and as always with money, I would recommend you wait until a sale, especially if you think this game's gonna end up in your backlog. By the way, I have a video for that, just saying. Overall, this game is severely misunderstood from what I can tell in online discussions, and I can solemnly state that this isn't Far Cry in space. It's its own game with its own vibes, and I genuinely believe that it puts an emphasis on immersive gameplay and an exploratory sense of the world that goes around you. And I think it's one of the most unique worlds I've ever played in a video game, and I would fully recommend people to play it. It is far from perfect, but I genuinely believe that this game deserves so much more than what it has had. But that's just my opinion. After all, I just count them how I see them.